I'd like to welcome in now criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor, as well as host of the Courtroom Confidential podcast, Josh Ritter. Josh, great to see you. So what do you think happens in court today, and what does it potentially mean going forward?
There's so much going on in this case. First of all, your reporter did an excellent job of covering all of it, but basically we've got several things at play. There was a habeas filed last year. That's part of the discussion this morning. That is what has this new evidence, the declaration from one of the Menudo brothers or Menudo band members, and this letter from one of the brothers to his cousin. Then you've also got George Gascon saying he wants to grant them some sort of resentencing, making it not a special circumstance murder, meaning they would be eligible for parole. And if all of that fails, they're asking for clemency. As far as what's going to happen this morning, I think we may hear some testimony from that aunt who's advanced in years. But if anything, it looks like we might be picking dates after Nathan Hochman, which, to add another wrench in the works here, there's a brand new DA in Los Angeles. When Mr. Hochman takes office in December, I think they want to have all of this heard then, rather than rushing to any kind of decision before there's a change in leadership in the DA's office.
All right, so Joshua, we have heard there is just so much going on with this case. We've heard from several family members. They are advocating for the brothers to be released. I'd like to listen to some of that.
That their actions, while tragic, were the desperate response of two boys trying to survive the unspeakable cruel of their father.
If Lyle and Eric's trial happened today, the outcome would be drastically different. The evidence of their father's abuse would have been a central part of their defense.
I think about the pain and suffering they endured. It breaks my heart to know that the system failed them so profoundly.
Like so many others, I struggled to process the events of that fateful August day and the loss that I felt. Over time, it became clear that there were two other victims there on that day, my cousins Lyle and Eric.
All right, so Josh, that was a compilation of some of that verbalized support. How much does that potentially impact what happens?
I think it's the reason why we're here. I think it's the only reason why we have traction in this case is that the victims' family members are on board with this decision. If they were opposed to this, I don't think we would be talking about this today. But the fact that all of these family members, aside from a couple who are very vocal about their opposition to it, but most of them are in support of this idea. And as they expressed, this isn't really a legal reasoning that they're asking for resentencing. It's essentially everyone's saying it's been enough time. Everyone's saying that culturally we're looking at this case differently now than we did 30 years ago, and it's time that they be granted essentially some mercy in this case.
So, we're seeing documentaries, we're seeing docuseries, we're seeing fictional series based on real events. So much interest in this case. Let's just talk about this lottery that happened for those, I think it was 16 or 18 seats available inside the courtroom. How often does something like that happen?
It's very rare. And people getting into a lottery when they're not even going to show up. I mean, they're going to be showing up virtually, perhaps on a computer screen. So it just, I think, demonstrates, yeah, 30 years later, we're having documentaries and dramatized series and, countless news coverage on this case. People are still very interested in this case. And I think it's because people still feel very conflicted about what happened. It's one thing, they shotgunned their parents to death. There's no getting around that. And they admitted their involvement in it. But it's another thing at how they obviously, I think, suffered from severe abuse and systematic for years at the hands of their father.
And Josh, my last question for you. So we know that attorneys for the brothers have asked the governor for clemency, but as you mentioned, the governor is saying he's going to wait for this new DA who has to come into office, has to review the case before making a decision. What do you think is the most realistic path to the brothers being released if it does, in fact, happen?
I think that Mr. Hochman is probably going to review this and probably agree with his predecessor's assessment of this case. I cannot see, after all this kind of groundswell of movement towards granting them a resentencing, that he would stand in the way of that. If that happens, then they would become eligible for parole, and it would go before a parole board. And you could see a parole board granting them parole in this case. And that may not happen before Thanksgiving or Christmas. It may not even happen before the end of the year, but I think that's probably the most likely scenario. And it could move within months. So it may be something that in the coming weeks here, we might be seeing them walk out of prison.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you that because a lot of people, I think, had hoped maybe that they would be released if they were to be released by Thanksgiving. It does not appear, that that's essentially impossible. But if they're granted parole, I mean, how quickly could they walk out of those prison doors?
If they're granted parole, it's just a matter of making an order to have them released. But the question becomes, when will the parole board meet on this, and will they grant them parole at their first hearing? That's kind of anyone's guess. I would say that when it comes to the criminal justice system, it moves at pretty much a glacial pace. So none of this is going to move quickly. But as far as I'm concerned, this has all been at breakneck speed since we heard from Mr. Gascon saying that he was considering this case to where we're standing now.
All right. Well, we will certainly see what happens in court today. Step one in what is many-stepped process. All right, Josh Ritter, thank you so much.
Thank you.